Postcolonial ecocriticism is an interdisciplinary approach that combines insights from postcolonial studies and ecocriticism. It focuses on the environmental impacts of colonialism, exploring how imperialism and colonial exploitation have affected both the land and the people of formerly colonized regions. This field seeks to examine the relationships between nature, culture, and power dynamics, particularly in the context of the environmental degradation caused by colonial practices. Key themes in postcolonial ecocriticism: environmental degradation and colonialism. Colonial regimes often exploited natural resources in colonized regions, leading to deforestation, soil depletion, and disruption of indigenous ecosystems. Postcolonial ecocriticism investigates how colonial powers treated nature as an unlimited resource for extraction, disregarding the environmental consequences. Indigenous knowledge and environmental practices. Many postcolonial ecocritics highlight how indigenous knowledge systems, which often emphasize a symbiotic relationship with nature, were marginalized or erased by colonial authorities. This framework examines how reclaiming indigenous environmental practices can contribute to sustainable ecological models. Ecological imperialism. Alfred Crosby's concept of ecological imperialism examines how European colonizers introduced new plants, animals, and diseases that reshaped the ecosystems of colonized lands, often to the detriment of local biodiversity. This concept is central to postcolonial ecocriticism, emphasizing the long-lasting environmental impacts of colonization. Literary representations of nature. Postcolonial ecocritics analyze literary texts from colonized regions to understand how colonialism altered the relationship between people and their environments. Works by authors such as Chinua Achebe, Derek Walcott, and Amitav Ghosh explore these relationships, addressing the cultural and ecological ramifications of imperialism. Climate change and global inequality. The legacies of colonialism also persist in the contemporary context of climate change. Postcolonial ecocriticism highlights how nations in the Global South, which have historically been exploited for their resources, bear the brunt of climate change's effects despite contributing the least to the problem. Narratives of resistance and ecological justice. Postcolonial ecocriticism is concerned with ecological justice and the ways in which marginalized communities resist environmental degradation. These narratives often emphasize the need for decolonizing environmental policies and frameworks. Key scholars and works. Rob Nixon, Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor. Nixon examines how environmental degradation disproportionately affects marginalized communities in postcolonial contexts, framing these issues within the concept of slow violence. Amitav Ghosh, The Hungry Tide. This novel explores the Sundarbans in India and Bangladesh, addressing issues of displacement, colonial legacies, and environmental vulnerability. Val Plumwood, a leading ecofeminist who has influenced postcolonial ecocriticism, particularly regarding the dualistic thinking that separates nature from culture. Postcolonial ecocriticism bridges the gap between environmental studies and the historical experiences of colonized peoples, addressing issues of ecological exploitation, social justice, and the ongoing effects of colonialism on both people and the environment. You said. Main arguments with simple example. ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. Postcolonial ecocriticism examines how colonialism impacted the environment and how these effects persist today, focusing on the relationships between humans, nature, and power. Here are some main arguments of postcolonial ecocriticism with simple examples. 1. Environmental exploitation by colonial powers. Argument. Colonial powers exploited the natural resources of colonized lands, damaging the environment and disrupting local ecosystems for profit. Example. In India during British rule, large-scale deforestation occurred as the British cleared forests to grow cash crops like tea, cotton, and indigo for export. This led to the destruction of biodiversity and loss of local environmental knowledge. 2. Marginalization of indigenous knowledge. Argument. Indigenous people had sustainable ways of interacting with nature, but colonial powers often dismissed or erased their knowledge in favor of Western methods, which harmed the environment. Example. Many African and Native American tribes practiced crop rotation and water conservation to maintain soil health. Colonial powers imposed monoculture farming, growing a single crop over large areas, which led to soil degradation and food insecurity. 3. Ecological imperialism. Argument. Colonizers introduced new species, plants, and animals that reshaped the ecosystems of colonized lands, often causing harm to local environments. Example. When the British colonized Australia, they brought rabbits, which multiplied rapidly and caused widespread damage to the native vegetation. This disrupted the ecosystem and threatened indigenous species. 4. Environmental justice and inequality. Argument. Formerly colonized nations, especially in the global south, suffer more from environmental problems like climate change, despite contributing less to the problem. Example. Many Pacific Island nations, such as Tuvalu, face severe risks from rising sea levels due to climate change. These countries did not historically contribute to industrial pollution, but they experience its worst effects. 5. Resistance to environmental exploitation. Argument. Postcolonial ecocriticism often highlights the efforts of indigenous people and local communities to resist environmental degradation and reclaim control over their lands. Example. In Latin America, indigenous groups have resisted the destruction of the Amazon rainforest by corporations seeking to extract oil and minerals. These groups advocate for protecting the environment and preserving their traditional lands. 6. Cultural and environmental alienation. Argument. Colonization not only exploited land but also alienated local people from their environment, disrupting their cultural connection to nature. Example. In Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, the arrival of European colonizers brings not only cultural change but also shifts in how the Igbo people interact with their land and resources, weakening their traditional practices. In sum, postcolonial ecocriticism critiques how colonialism disrupted natural ecosystems and local cultures, while advocating for ecological justice and the reclamation of indigenous environmental practices. You said. Apply it in classical Indian English novels. ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. Applying postcolonial ecocriticism to classical Indian English novels involves analyzing how colonialism influenced the depiction of nature and the environment, particularly in relation to land exploitation, indigenous knowledge, and the alienation of people from their natural surroundings. Here's how postcolonial ecocriticism could be applied to a few classic Indian novels. 1. Untouchable, by Mulk Raj Anand. Argument. Colonialism altered traditional Indian society and its relationship with the environment, leading to environmental degradation and social inequality. Example. In Untouchable, the protagonist Baka, an oppressed lower caste, untouchable, works as a sweeper in a British colonized India. The novel doesn't focus directly on the environment but provides a backdrop where British rule and industrialization have disrupted traditional Indian structures, contributing to a hierarchical society that ignores the well-being of people and the environment. Postcolonial ecocriticism. The pollution and filth that Baka is forced to clean can be seen as a metaphor for the environmental and societal degradation under colonial rule. The British not only disrupt social structures but also alienate people like Baka from their natural surroundings by reducing their interaction with the land to menial, dirty labor. 2. Kanthapura, by Raja Rao. Argument. The colonial imposition on land use and agricultural practices harmed local communities and ecosystems, displacing people from their traditional, sustainable ways of interacting with nature. Example. Kanthapura tells the story of a small village in South India affected by Gandhian principles of nonviolent resistance against British rule. The novel shows how the villagers' lives are tied to their land and natural surroundings. The arrival of colonial authorities disrupts these traditional ways of life, as the British promote large-scale industrial projects that exploit natural resources. Postcolonial ecocriticism. The novel highlights the contrast between the villagers' reverence for their environment, particularly the river Himavathi, and the colonial authorities' exploitative approach to land use. The river symbolizes life and sustenance for the villagers, while the British view the land merely as a source of profit. This tension reflects the broader ecological destruction caused by colonialism, as traditional, sustainable practices are disregarded for economic gain. 3. A River Sutra, by Gita Mehta. Argument. Colonialism alters the spiritual and cultural connection between people and nature, commodifying natural resources and disrupting indigenous ways of life. Example. A River Sutra explores various interconnected stories along the Narmada River, focusing on themes of spirituality, identity, and nature. The river, which is sacred to many, becomes a site of various human dramas that reflect India's cultural and environmental diversity. In the postcolonial context, the river is not just a natural entity but also a cultural symbol threatened by modernity and environmental degradation. Postcolonial ecocriticism. The river's role as both a sacred entity and a resource for exploitation can be seen as a reflection of how colonialism has commodified nature. The novel illustrates how the cultural and spiritual connection to nature is weakened as the river is increasingly seen in material terms, paralleling the ecological impacts of colonialism and postcolonial development. 4. The God of Small Things, by Arundhati Roy. Argument: colonialism and postcolonial modernity create environmental destruction and social inequality, affecting both the land and its people. Example: The God of Small Things is set in Kerala and touches on themes of caste, family, and colonial legacies. The novel also engages with the environment, especially the river that runs through the town of Ayamanem, where much of the action takes place. The river, which once represented life and vitality, becomes polluted and stagnant over time, mirroring the decay of the community. Postcolonial Ecocriticism. The novel can be read as a critique of both colonial and postcolonial systems that have polluted not only the natural environment but also social relations. The river's degradation represents the ecological damage that colonialism and modernity bring to traditional ways of life. The connection between environmental destruction and social oppression is central to the novel, as the marginalized characters are affected by both. 5. Train to Pakistan, by Khushwant Singh. Argument: colonialism and the partition of India lead to both environmental and human destruction, alienating people from their land and displacing entire communities. Example: Train to Pakistan focuses on the violence and displacement caused by the partition of India in 1947, a direct result of British colonial policies. The novel depicts how the river Sutlej becomes a boundary that separates the newly created countries of India and Pakistan, symbolizing the division of land and people. Postcolonial Ecocriticism. The river, which once united communities, becomes a symbol of division and violence, reflecting how colonialism led to environmental and social dislocation. The novel illustrates how the partition disrupted not only human communities but also their relationship with the land and natural environment, as fields and rivers became contested borders. In these novels, postcolonial ecocriticism can be applied to explore how colonialism disrupted traditional relationships with nature, marginalized indigenous knowledge, and contributed to the environmental degradation that continues to affect India today. The novels provide powerful examples of how colonial exploitation affected both the people and the land, leading to long-term ecological and social consequences. You said. Significance, relevance, legacy, contribution, impact, strength, weakness, uniqueness, features. ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. When applying postcolonial ecocriticism to classical Indian English novels, we can assess their significance, relevance, legacy, contribution, impact, strengths, weaknesses, and unique features as follows. 1. Significance. Postcolonial ecocriticism in Indian English novels is significant because it offers insights into how colonialism reshaped India's natural environment and local cultural practices. These works depict how traditional relationships with nature were disrupted by imperialism, leading to long-term environmental and social consequences. Example: novels like Kanthapura and A River Sutra show how British exploitation of natural resources affected Indian villages and rivers, making these works important in understanding India's ecological history. 2. Relevance. This approach is especially relevant today, as it links colonial histories to modern environmental issues such as deforestation, climate change, and water scarcity. By exploring colonialism's environmental legacy, postcolonial ecocriticism highlights the need for sustainable practices and ecological justice. Example: in The God of Small Things, the pollution of the river echoes present-day environmental concerns, making the novel still relevant for discussions on ecological degradation in postcolonial societies. 3. Legacy. The legacy of classical Indian English novels in postcolonial ecocriticism lies in their ability to document the environmental and cultural consequences of colonization. These novels provide a historical record of how British colonialism altered India's natural landscapes and indigenous ways of life. Example: Train to Pakistan reflects the ecological and human dislocation caused by the partition, a direct outcome of British colonial rule, leaving a lasting legacy on how we understand environmental and political division. 4. Contribution. These novels contribute to literary ecocriticism by exploring themes of displacement, environmental degradation, and the marginalization of indigenous knowledge. They provide a lens to view not just the human impact of colonialism but also its profound ecological consequences. Example: In Untouchable, the polluted environment that Baca navigates mirrors the social and ecological exploitation of marginalized communities under colonial rule, contributing to discussions on environmental justice. 5. Impact. The impact of postcolonial ecocriticism in these novels is their ability to reshape how readers think about the relationship between colonization, nature, and culture. They show how colonialism's environmental effects persist, impacting modern-day environmental movements and policies. Example: the portrayal of the polluted river in The God of Small Things has inspired readers to consider the broader ecological impact of industrialization and modernity on traditional landscapes. 6. Strengths. Multidimensional analysis. These novels provide a comprehensive view of how colonialism affected both the environment and society, making them powerful tools for eco-critical analysis. Strong environmental symbolism. The use of rivers, landscapes, and natural elements as symbols of colonial disruption is a key strength in works like Kanthapura and A River Sutra. Cultural insight. These novels capture the nuanced relationship between culture and nature in the Indian context, offering valuable perspectives on indigenous environmental practices. 7. Weaknesses. Limited direct focus on the environment. Some of these novels, while rich in postcolonial themes, do not always focus primarily on environmental degradation. For example, Untouchable deals more with social hierarchy than with ecological themes, though the environment is a metaphorical backdrop. Representation of modernity. In some novels, the tension between colonialism and environmental degradation is not fully explored in terms of postcolonial modernity. Novels like Train to Pakistan focus more on human displacement than on ecological changes. 8. Uniqueness. Integration of ecological and cultural critique. Indian English novels provide a unique combination of postcolonial critique and environmental awareness, highlighting the specific ways in which colonialism disrupted both ecosystems and social structures. Rich symbolic use of nature. Indian novels often use natural elements, like rivers and landscapes, as metaphors for cultural and political realities. This is particularly seen in works like A River Sutra, where the river serves as both a spiritual and environmental symbol. 9. Features. Environmental themes. Novels like The God of Small Things and A River Sutra use rivers and landscapes to reflect on both ecological degradation and the disintegration of social systems, blending postcolonial themes with nature. Cultural and historical contexts. These novels are deeply rooted in India's cultural traditions and historical experiences under British rule, making their ecological themes more poignant. Complex characters and societal critiques. By using characters whose lives are intricately connected to the environment, such as villagers and farmers, the novels demonstrate how colonial and postcolonial power dynamics impact both people and nature. Conclusion. In classical Indian English novels, postcolonial ecocriticism highlights the long-lasting ecological effects of colonial exploitation, the marginalization of indigenous environmental knowledge, and the alienation of people from their natural surroundings. Through rich symbolism, nuanced critiques of colonialism, and vivid descriptions of nature, these works offer unique contributions to both postcolonial and ecological discourse. Their strengths lie in their ability to intertwine cultural and environmental concerns, while their weaknesses mainly revolve around limited direct environmental focus in some texts. The relevance and impact of these novels remain strong, especially in today's context of global environmental crises. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info.